Welcome to Affair Crimes Uncovered. Enjoy this true crime story.
The story of Warren Jeffs is one of power, control, and the abuse of trust. As the self-proclaimed prophet of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, FLDS, Jeffs ruled over his followers with an iron fist. His influence and authority extended deeply into the lives of his followers, shaping their beliefs, controlling their behaviors, and even dictating their most personal choices, from family dynamics to marriage decisions. Warren Jeffs' story isn't just about religious extremism. It's also a tale of manipulation, deception, and an intense psychological hold over a tight-knit community that followed him without question. His actions eventually led to high-profile legal battles, investigations, and a level of notoriety that made him one of America's most infamous religious figures. Here's a look at how Warren Jeffs rose to power, the effect he had on his community, and the chilling crimes that eventually led to his downfall. The Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS, is a splinter group that broke away from the mainstream Mormon Church due to its adherence to the practice of polygamy, which was banned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, in 1890. While the mainstream LDS Church moved away from this practice, FLDS members saw it as a core tenet of their faith. They believed that plural marriage was essential for achieving salvation and continuing their family lineage in heaven. The FLDS established communities in remote areas, including Colorado City, Arizona, and Hilldale, Utah, which became known as Short Creek. In these isolated communities, members lived a life centered around their religious beliefs, largely cut off from the outside world. The community was led by a single prophet, a position of power that few ever questioned. Warren Jeffs was born into this world in 1955, the son of Rulon Jeffs, the prophet who ruled FLDS for decades. From a young age, Warren was groomed to believe in the church's teachings. As he grew up, he became known for his devoutness, his strict adherence to FLDS beliefs, and his close connection to his father. Rulon Jeffs ruled over the FLDS community until his death in 2002. As the church's prophet, Rulon held immense authority over his followers, making decisions that affected every aspect of their lives. Warren, one of his many children, was close to him and quickly rose in prominence within the church. By the time of Rulon's death, Warren was well positioned to take over the leadership of FLDS. When Rulon died, Warren declared himself the new prophet, claiming that he was the rightful successor chosen by God. His rise to power was swift and uncontested, as most members of the community believed in his authority without question. Under his leadership, the FLDS community became even more insular and restrictive. Warren Jeffs didn't just inherit his father's power, he expanded it. He introduced strict rules that controlled nearly every aspect of his followers' lives. He required them to dress conservatively, forbade them from engaging with the outside world, and demanded absolute obedience. The people in the FLDS community were told that their salvation depended on their loyalty to him, their prophet. He isolated his followers, ensuring that they had little contact with the outside world, which he deemed as evil and corrupt. One of the most disturbing aspects of Warren Jeffs' leadership was his implementation of placement marriages. Under this system, Warren claimed that he alone had the authority to assign marriages, believing that only he could determine who belonged with whom. These marriages were often arranged between young girls and much older men, many of whom already had multiple wives. In FLDS, marriage was considered sacred, a duty to God, and a way to secure a place in heaven. Members believed that the more wives a man had, the closer he would be to God. Warren used this belief to his advantage, manipulating his followers and placing young girls in marriages with men they barely knew. For many young girls, this system was traumatic. They had no choice in whom they married, and some were forced into marriages at shockingly young ages. They were taught that obedience to Warren's will was obedience to God, and that resisting their placement marriage could result in eternal damnation. This fear of punishment kept many silent and compliant. Life in the FLDS community was strict and regimented. Warren controlled his followers by keeping them isolated from outside influences. They were taught that the outside world was dangerous and full of sin. Television, the internet, and other forms of media were banned. Even the education that children received was limited, with many children only taught what was necessary to read FLDS scriptures. Warren's teachings were the primary focus of the community's education, and questioning his authority was unthinkable. People within the community were encouraged to report on each other, creating an environment of fear and suspicion. Families were constantly reminded that their salvation depended on their complete devotion to Warren and the church. To ensure absolute loyalty, Warren implemented harsh punishments for those who defied him. Men who questioned his authority would lose their families, as Warren had the power to reassign wives and children to other men within the community. This absolute control made Warren one of the most powerful figures in the lives of his followers. For the FLDS, Warren was not just a man, he was their connection to God, a prophet whose word was considered infallible. As Warren's rule became increasingly authoritarian, former members of the FLDS began speaking out. Many of them had escaped from the oppressive conditions of the community and were ready to share their stories. Reports of abuse, underage marriages, and strict control spread beyond the community and began to catch the attention of law enforcement. Journalists and advocacy groups started investigating the FLDS and Warren Jeffs, uncovering disturbing stories of exploitation and abuse. Some former members bravely shared stories of young girls being forced into marriages, of families being torn apart, and of individuals suffering in silence under Warren's rule. In 2005, a warrant was issued for Warren's arrest on charges of arranging illegal marriages involving underage girls. This marked the beginning of a series of legal battles that would eventually expose the full extent of Warren Jeffs' influence and control over his community. But even with an arrest warrant, Warren managed to evade capture, going into hiding and becoming one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. For nearly a year, Warren Jeffs was a fugitive, moving between various safe houses and relying on loyal FLDS members to keep him hidden. During this time, he continued to communicate with his followers, sending messages and instructions that were treated as sacred guidance. His loyal supporters continued to believe in him, even as he was labeled a wanted criminal by law enforcement. The FBI placed Warren Jeffs on their 10 most wanted list, making him one of the country's most sought-after fugitives. The public attention on the case intensified, and more stories from former FLDS members began to emerge. Warren's followers were deeply devoted, convinced that he was an innocent man being persecuted for his beliefs. Finally, in August 2006, Warren Jeffs was captured near Las Vegas, Nevada, during a routine traffic stop. The arrest marked a turning point in the case, and a moment of hope for those who had suffered under his control. With Warren in custody, the full extent of his influence, manipulation, and abuse would soon come to light in a court of law. Warren Jeffs' trial was a significant event, drawing national attention and putting a spotlight on the practices within the FLDS community. The court was presented with overwhelming evidence of Warren's abuse of power, including testimonies from former members, audio recordings of his teachings, and records of underage marriages he had sanctioned. The most shocking evidence came from the testimonies of young girls who had been forced into marriages under Warren's orders. They spoke of being pressured, manipulated, and told that their obedience was a requirement for salvation. Their stories revealed the psychological hold Warren had over his followers and the extent to which he used his authority for his own purposes. In one chilling piece of evidence, audio recordings captured Warren instructing young brides on their marital duties, underscoring his control over even the most intimate aspects of their lives. His words painted a horrifying picture of a man who believed he had the divine right to dictate every detail of his followers' lives. After a lengthy trial, Warren Jeffs was convicted on multiple charges, including sexual assault of a minor. He was sentenced to life in prison, marking the end of his reign as the FLDS prophet. His conviction was a relief to those who had suffered under his control and a milestone for law enforcement and advocates who had fought to expose his crimes. Even from prison, however, Warren attempted to maintain control over his followers. He continued to send messages to FLDS members, issuing instructions and warnings from behind bars. His loyal followers saw him as a martyr, a man who had been wrongfully imprisoned for his beliefs, and they continued to revere him. The FLDS community was left shattered by Warren Jeffs' imprisonment. Many followers were forced to confront the painful reality of his actions and the extent of his manipulation. For some, this led to a crisis of faith and a reassessment of their beliefs. Others remained loyal, holding on to the belief that Warren was innocent and that he would one day return to lead them. Those who left the FLDS struggled to adjust to life outside the community. Many had limited education and little experience with the outside world. They faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives, finding new identities, and healing from the trauma they had experienced. Organizations dedicated to helping former FLDS members provided support, helping them access education, housing, and counseling services. These groups played a crucial role in helping individuals reclaim their lives, rebuild their self-worth, and move forward after years of control and manipulation. The legacy of Warren Jeffs is one of caution and complexity. His story is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the capacity for manipulation in the name of faith. His influence over the FLDS community was profound, but so were the scars he left behind. Today, Warren Jeffs remains in prison, yet his story continues to resonate as a warning of what can happen when absolute authority is given to a single individual. His actions have led to greater awareness of the risks associated with isolated religious groups and have inspired efforts to protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation and abuse. For many, the name Warren Jeffs will forever be associated with betrayal, manipulation, and abuse of power. His story serves as both a tragedy and a lesson, reminding us of the importance of accountability, oversight, and compassion in any community, religious or otherwise. Warren Jeffs' journey from a religious leader to a convicted criminal is a testament to the lengths people will go to protect their beliefs and the devastating effects of unchecked authority. His story is a complex one, filled with moments of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately justice. It's a story that asks us to reflect on the power of faith, the vulnerability of trust, and the courage required to seek the truth in the face of deception. For the former members of the FLDS, the journey toward healing and reclaiming their lives after Warren Jeffs' imprisonment has been long and complex. Many who escaped or were exiled from the community faced a world they had never been allowed to experience, one that was vastly different from the isolated world of Short Creek, where obedience and conformity were the cornerstones of daily life. These former members had grown up with limited access to education, technology, and outside influences. Many struggled with feelings of guilt, fear, and confusion about leaving the only life they had ever known. For years, Warren Jeffs had ingrained in them that leaving the community was a direct path to damnation. Organizations like the Holding Out Help Foundation and the Hope Organization began assisting FLDS ex-members with the resources they needed to reintegrate into mainstream society. They offered housing, job training, therapy, and education, which were critical for these individuals as they built lives free from FLDS control. The adjustment was challenging. Many former FLDS members had to cope with not only practical hurdles, but also the psychological trauma left by years of manipulation and abuse. Therapy and counseling were essential for addressing the deep-seated fears, anxieties, and guilt that lingered even after leaving. Over time, with support, many former members found a new sense of freedom and self-identity. Despite being sentenced to life in prison, Warren Jeffs continued to wield considerable influence over his followers from behind bars. His devoted followers within FLDS saw him as a martyr, a prophet unjustly imprisoned by the outside world. Through coded letters and secret messages relayed by loyal intermediaries, he continued to issue commands and guidance to his followers. In his messages, Warren spoke of a coming apocalypse and often described himself as a victim of persecution for his religious beliefs. He instructed his followers to isolate themselves even further from the outside world, reinforcing their belief that mainstream society was corrupt and intent on destroying their faith. He forbade certain foods, instructed members to stop attending public schools, and even issued orders for members to relocate, further fragmenting the community. This ongoing control over the FLDS fueled tensions within the group, creating a divide between those who remained devout and those who began questioning his legitimacy. The community continued to splinter, as some members were pushed away or excommunicated for disobedience, while others left voluntarily as they became disillusioned. The Warren Jeffs case brought attention to the broader issue of religious-based abuse and exploitation. His trial exposed the lack of oversight in isolated religious communities, where charismatic leaders could wield extreme influence without checks on their authority. It highlighted the need for legal protections for vulnerable individuals and sparked conversations about religious freedoms and the limitations of those freedoms when they conflict with individual rights and welfare. In response to the case, lawmakers and advocacy groups began pushing for stronger legal protections for minors, particularly in cases involving forced marriages and underage marriages in closed religious communities. There were calls for more resources for law enforcement to address abuse within these insular groups, and a push for education programs aimed at identifying and preventing religious-based exploitation. The case also helped raise awareness about the impact of psychological manipulation and abuse. Organizations across the country developed training programs to help law enforcement, social workers, and healthcare professionals recognize the signs of manipulation and control within religious sects, making it easier to intervene and provide support to those affected. Perhaps one of the most powerful legacies of the Warren Jeffs case is the courage shown by survivors who broke their silence and shared their stories with the world. Many of these survivors had been raised to believe that speaking out against FLDS leadership was a sin, a betrayal of their faith, and a guarantee of eternal punishment. Despite these fears, several former members found the strength to come forward and testify against Warren Jeffs, recounting the abuse, coercion, and control they experienced under his rule. Their stories highlighted the power of resilience and the human spirit's ability to endure, even under the harshest of conditions. These survivors have become advocates, working to protect others from similar abuse. Many have written books, given interviews, and participated in documentaries, hoping to raise awareness and prevent others from suffering as they did. By sharing their experiences, they have shed light on the hidden abuses that can occur within insular communities, and have inspired countless others to speak out and seek freedom. In the years following Warren Jeffs' conviction, the FLDS community has significantly declined in both size and influence. Many members who initially stayed in the community began to question Jeffs' teachings and the future of FLDS under his leadership. His extreme rules, prophecies of doom, and increasingly erratic messages contributed to growing skepticism. Additionally, legal actions taken against FLDS properties and assets by former members and state governments have weakened the community's financial foundation. As the state seized FLDS assets, many members were forced to leave their homes in Short Creek, disrupting the stability and isolation that had allowed the community to thrive for so many years. A once thriving community that was built on shared beliefs and a strong sense of unity has become fractured. The power structure that Warren Jeffs created has eroded, and as members have left or been excommunicated, the FLDS has lost much of its former control over the lives of its followers. The story of Warren Jeffs and the FLDS serves as a cautionary tale about the power of faith, loyalty, and the potential for abuse within any organization that lacks accountability. Jeffs' story shows how devotion, when placed in the hands of a manipulative leader, can lead to harm and suffering. His case underscores the importance of questioning authority, advocating for one's personal rights, and recognizing the fine line between faith and fanaticism. The followers of Warren Jeffs were driven by a belief in eternal salvation and loyalty to their prophet. They were raised to believe that obedience was the path to heaven and that any doubt or dissent would lead to damnation. This belief system, rooted in fear and manipulation, kept the community under Jeffs' control for decades. But his story also demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit, the courage of those who spoke out, the determination of survivors who rebuilt their lives, and the strength of those who left the FLDS to seek freedom remind us that even in the darkest situations, hope can prevail. Warren Jeffs' actions have left an enduring impact on American society. His case brought religious-based abuse into the national conversation, prompting changes in law enforcement practices, increased awareness about cult-like behavior, and support for victims of religious control and manipulation. His downfall also highlighted the delicate balance between religious freedom and the protection of individual rights. While freedom of religion is a cornerstone of American values, the Warren Jeffs case emphasized that this freedom does not extend to actions that exploit, harm, or infringe upon the rights of others. Jeffs' conviction set a precedent that leaders within insular communities cannot hide behind religious doctrine to justify abuse. The legacy of the FLDS story continues to inform public policy, legal reform, and advocacy work today. From anti-trafficking organizations to mental health professionals, those working to protect vulnerable individuals look to this case as an example of how abuse can be cloaked in religious authority and the importance of intervention when lines are crossed. The story of Warren Jeffs and the FLDS community remains a significant chapter in the history of American religious extremism. For many, it's a reminder of the complex dynamics that can emerge in isolated communities, where belief and control become intertwined in harmful ways. The courage of survivors and the legal actions that followed Warren Jeffs' arrest have inspired a renewed focus on the rights of individuals within religious communities. As Warren Jeffs serves his life sentence, the remnants of his community continue to grapple with the aftermath of his leadership. For those who lived through his reign, the pain and trauma may take a lifetime to heal, but their resilience and courage have sparked a movement of awareness, protection, and change. Their story serves as a beacon, shining light on the hidden darkness of religious-based abuse and offering hope to those still searching for freedom. The story of Warren Jeffs and the FLDS has been retold in books, documentaries, and interviews, reminding the world of the dangers of unchecked authority. It is a story that serves as both a warning and a lesson, a tale of power misused, faith distorted, and the enduring strength of the human spirit to seek truth and liberation, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable control. In the end, the legacy of Warren Jeffs is not just his fall from power, but the rise of those who dared to stand up, speak out, and reclaim their lives. Their voices continue to echo, challenging the world to remember that no person should wield such absolute control over others, and that faith, in its truest form, should uplift, empower, and never imprison.